Morning, everyone. It's Jonathan Corrie. Welcome back to another episode of the Precursive Perspective. I'm delighted to be joined from my German friend that I met on the internet, Jens Harder, joining us from Sitecore. Good morning, sir. How are you?
Thank you for having me. That's a nice introduction. Very well. I heard we had an interesting Monday morning, right?
Yeah, we did have an
Oh,
interesting.
good.
We did
Oh,
have an
good.
interesting Monday morning. On my side, everyone, I saw the end of some sort of car chase in London. All very exciting on the walk to school. Probably not as exciting as what we're going to talk about in this podcast. So, Jens, do you want to give us a little bit of an introduction to yourself, a bit about scope of your role, where you work, the checkered history,
Gladly.
whatever you want to touch on?
Yeah, sure. Jens Harder. I'm the Senior Director for Professional Services at Sitecore. I basically guide the consultants in the EMEA geo to deliver superb services, right? Be the trusted advisors. I've been with Sitecore for more than 10 years, so I've seen kind of some of the changes. Um, in the company, in the business, touch upon some of the topics we talk about where we've been through a journey, I'd say, at Sitecore, right? And we got the chance to experience different flavors of how you run services, how services evolve. And I've been kind of building up the services practice over here in EMEA.
Great. And tell us a little bit about what does Sitecore provide to your customers?
So Sitecore offers a marketing automation CDP, kind of we don't want to say suite, but it's basically a composable DXP solution
Hmm.
that helps you deliver content on different channels, I'd say, right? And it grew over, we started 20 odd years ago with web content management. And then kind of as the industry went on, we added personalization to really target your audiences. We're partner first. So as many of the audience might work, we scale with partners, right? But we do have advisory services that I work in where we come in as the trusted advisors and kind of complement how the partners approach the implementations.
Okay, great. Well, that gives us a little bit about the scope of the role and the scope of services in your organization. I mean, I think something that you and I connected around was like, I would say some of the subtle changes in market conditions that are impacting all of us. So tell us a little bit about what are some of your observations on some of the market trends that are impacting you and your team at the moment?
Sure. So I think as we discussed, right, over the past, I think we've been saying it for like 10 years, but really over the past 5 years, we've seen this change, or I try to avoid pivot. We can count pivot later uh, in this podcast, but it's really the change from selling your services as a subscription going into SaaS. That for us was probably the biggest shift, right? That we were on premise initially. You were hosting your solutions in a data center in your basement,
Hmm.
and we shifted that to SaaS across the different products. Some of the acquisitions came in. Um, so I'd say SaaS, and then services kind of followed suit, as in we went away from ad hoc, we'll scope something, we deliver hours, over to really you want to subscribe to services, you get a named consultant, a technical account manager set to work with your team because we really want to work on that journey, right? We want to walk with you. And that's not done in somebody spending 5 hours over 2 weeks. So it's really this walk with you on that journey.
Hmm. Okay, cool. And when you say partner first, just define that a little bit more for us. That do you mean that third party services partners are
Exactly.
delivering on behalf of your customer to your customer
Exactly. So we got
with
this
support from?
trifecta of client, cycle
Yep.
services, and the partner. The
Hmm.
partner could be a boutique agency, could be a big systems integrator. It's really someone who understands the client, right? Maybe beyond the scope of that DXP that we do, because we're one puzzle, right? The most important piece of that puzzle, but obviously one piece of that puzzle. The partners know the clients, and we come in with that product expertise as the vendor.
Okay, cool. All right, great. Well, we're gonna touch on the role of partners and partner ecosystems as we go through this conversation. So we I think one of the things at this time of year, which is what are we, the 25th of November. A lot of strategy, budgeting, and planning. Oftentimes, my observation is a little bit too much of the budgeting and not enough of the strategy at this time of year. So, you've been, you and I have talked about kind of how to better work back from like a corporate strategy and as you say, in a business like yours, the business has been evolving, the business model has been evolving. I'm sure the customer base that work with has been evolving a lot. So, how important have you found it to have a clear services strategy that aligns to that business strategy?
Very, I think, and we're different adjectives, I guess, to describe that, but it's it's critical. I think where I currently see that shift happening is I don't want to say it's even more important. That's kind of marketing cheesy, right? But
Mhm.
it really you want to do this shift, I guess, to SaaS and subscription and services in subscriptions, right? You need to understand what you're working towards, if that makes sense, right?
Mhm.
So if you don't understand the strategy of that's not communicated well down to the functions, and this is beyond services in an org, you see the gaps, right? And I think it takes that mind shift and alignment in what do we do differently and why do we do that? And certainly the clients have evolved, partners have evolved, right? It's a different world. Everyone's talking AI. You need to understand where that journey goes because you don't do things completely different, but they change ever so slightly, right? And you want to be on that path.
Yeah. I mean, I think something that is sometimes quite hard for people to appreciate is like that strategy is not always going to feel well communicated internally sometimes, right?
I read something, absolutely. I read something on LinkedIn this morning on when are people happy, right? And people aren't going to be happy until they're happy, which is great. I'll quote someone later, but it really is. It's this mind shift, and that goes with people, but also with that enablement. I think that's that key, right? And then we talked about where you position certain functions that adds to it, or maybe makes it easier or slightly
Mm.
more difficult, but it's change of the times.
Yeah, I think the other thing though is that like there's your peers will be doing something akin to what you're doing in services, which is planning out their strategy in response to corporate strategy, targets, quota, et al. And I think that you can benefit massively from taking a little bit of time to try and understand your peers' strategy as they're developing it, because I think too often people just maybe roll up to the SKO, right? And I'm like, oh, that's what sales is doing this year. Didn't know that. That's going to massively impact our world. Or customer success, for example. I've seen some very closely aligned services and success organizations. I know your business is pretty good at that. I know some of the folks in CS, and they've spoken about that alignment with PS in the past with me. But I've seen functions where they're rolling out paid CS offerings and no one told services, and now you've got this kind of conflict, or you've got a TAM function sitting in CS that's delivering services that's kind of in not in conflict, but there
Mhm.
needs to be alignment. So I think the importance of getting ahead of what your peers are doing is something that I think good leaders do.
Agreed, and to a point, right? I think we talked about this maturity, or I like journey better, right? Or
Yep.
that trajectory you are as a vendor. Um, but absolutely, it's communication, right? If you got two functions, that's one of my favorites. And you have the same job title. That's
Yep.
confusing. That's confusing internally. That's confusing externally.
Yep.
Not a good look, right?
Yep.
And with that strategy, I think that should be well, it should be included, really, right? Coming down from the top, like what are we trying to do? How do we scale it? How do we name it? And actually, how do we make folks work together and kind of get the buy-in into this newer world, if you will?
Yeah. And also, how do we create value, right? I think you understand like understanding how important it is to understand how value is created, how value is generated for the business, for the vendor. Not I'm not talking here about for the client. I'm talking about
Mhm.
how we valued, because that's something that's informed your thinking, has it not?
It did. I think it's equally important, right? It's the step back that you take towards what are we trying to do? Why are we trying to do that? What's the value for maybe the investors, maybe the shareholders, right? But what's the value to the client and really client value and translate that back into what's the value of the company? And that affects, well, the org structure really, right?
Yep.
In what focus do you want to set and what valuation or what addition do you need on what side of the balance sheet?
Yep. Well, I mean, if you're working towards a rule of 40, for example, which is a growth, a combination of
Hmm.
revenue growth and profitability. I say revenue growth rather than just pure ARR growth. It's revenue
Yeah.
growth and profitability combined to equal 40%. Services is valued behind software, right? So any additional percentage point in value that you can create, margin that you can create, is going to drive significant enterprise value for the business. And I think, the kind of the result of that at the moment and over like the last 18 months has been, you know, a companies waking up to how services can better impact sales, right? And that shift from being maybe an operational function or originally aligned to the finance or the customer organization, and then moving that much closer to the CRO or the sales function, right? If not for some organizations actually being housed, underneath the CRO. Um, and so you've kind of got this sometimes this shift between, are we a cost center, right? And we're really focused on driving, for example, sales, which is a very one-dimensional way to look at it, or are
Hmm.
we a profit center? Now, I know you've written uh, a lot about this in the past, and clearly done some research in that area. Like, what would you say some of the key differences are between those two operating models, cost center and profit center for services? Let's talk about that
Yeah.
for
Yeah, sure. I think and we run as a cost center. It's really, I think, black and white, and we talked about that it's not really black and white, right? Is
yeah.
cost center really you're focused on the product adoption. I think we said like this should be paramount whatever you're doing in services, right? We're all sellers to a point. Um, but I think it's really this customer success retention. Whereas in a profit center, you're really looking at revenue, getting, scaling billable services. So it's a bit more focused on I'd rather sell this, but it's not really adding the most value, but it adds to the bottom line, right? Which is exaggerated because we're not a profit center here. But I think in a cost center, well, you're focused on the margin that might align with the overall kind of focus on margin that we see. Does that make sense, right?
Yep.
But it's really this outlook, right? You support sales, you run kind of on your own to basically add to the revenue bit.
And so, kind of, how does that in your world then? How does that cascade through to like the KPIs that you would look at or that you would expect to see, perhaps more emphasized in one versus the other? So for you
I
guys, I'd
guess
imagine there's quite a lot around NPS and things of this ilk.
it yes, and that's a whole story of how you measure that, right? And what's the impact. But it's certainly well, we're shifting more towards the outcome focused metrics,
Hmm.
right? Away from margin, utilization, which is still important, but if my team's heavily utilized, but we don't make that, we don't have that impact with the clients, that still doesn't give me that outcome view, right? So it's certainly that mind shift set again that we said earlier that what are you focused on? What's kind of your North Star? Where do you walk towards, right?
Hmm.
But it's certainly how do you measure client value, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can be targeted on something, right? And this is where I think um there needs to be a level of awareness about the disconnect that can exist between like how you're targeted in your quota as a manager, as a director, as a VP of services, and then what the things that you care about in the org should also be. Because as you say, you can have high levels of billable utilization if that is your target. That's great. But if there's product adoption issues, if there is time to value issues, if there is customer experience issues, those are all going to bubble up and be escalated either to you or to others in your organization. And it becomes very visible very quickly. So, and it's no good in that situation to say, well, you target me on revenue and margin, so that's what I'm driving towards. It's like, that's how you'll lose your job relatively quickly if that's the one dimensional nature of how you think about, how you think about setting up your org. When you think about um that shift towards more of an outcomes focused, what's hard about that? Because in my experience, if you go and ask 20 PS consultants or 20 CSMs about how would you describe how our core ICP generates value from our solution, you get 40 different answers. So what have you found in that transition?
That's the fun and that fuzziness, right? Where it makes so much sense if you just write it down and post an article on LinkedIn versus how
Yeah,
do you actually make this or operationalize this, right? Or
yeah,
that difference between, well, this is really a cost center aspect, but we're ignoring that in spite of it, it has an effect, but for the bigger picture, right? Which certainly, as you touched upon, is something like we're tracking billable utilization. We got the services or sorry, this product escalation somewhere. Who can help? Well, we got the product experts in services, so we do help free of charge, obviously, right? Because that's what the client needs. Um, and what we're saying, we're running towards the fire because that's the value we provide. But how do we cater to it? It hurts our metrics, but it kind of feeds into the overall company metrics, right? In
mm,
terms of retention, adoption, good client experience. Um, I don't know. I think it's a great debate, right? I
mm,
think if you're lucky and the overall numbers are fine, we can certainly take that work on. And I wouldn't want to be, or my managers don't want to be someone who are saying we can't help. It affects the billable number, but you got to find ways that it still makes sense end of year, right, or in your budgets. So I think that's the conundrum currently what we're looking at shifting to outcome focus, but how far can we actually drive that with the current set of KPIs? Or once we shift to new KPIs, there's a lot of working, well, with my teams, with the delivery teams, but also working upwards with management to understand it's a different view, right? So some things might decline on paper, as in the metrics might go down, but it's not a bad thing because we're still doing something we call productive work or something that is adding value to a client, right? And
yeah,
then value again is being used in a lot of different ways and flavors and colors currently, but it is that doing what's right at the right time.
yeah. So something that I've been coached on and also advise others on is, there's often this conflation of terminology that's used, management speak, about outcomes and value, right? And outcomes, if you're selling in B2B and you're selling to, reasonably senior people, whether it's like you guys, you're selling into the probably I would say the marketing or product marketing
Yep.
areas of the business probably versus, you might be selling into finance, you might be selling into ops, you might be selling into IT. Um, Outcomes is usually linked to what people are targeted on in those areas, right? So it's what are the targets of the CMO, right? And it's going to be the revenue, growing pipeline, brand awareness, whatever those things are. And often it's just either growing like those things or reducing the cost associated with those things. And then the value, and these two things are conflated. The value for me is always the monetary value that a client realizes from that change. So if we save X amount of time in how we do a marketing campaign, that's what's the FTE equivalent, right? Or the FTE cost, or what's the impact on the bottom line. Um, and it's hard because you have to have the challenge with it is you actually have to go after like a discrete set of things, right? Because if you try to sort of boil the ocean, right? If you talk to a CMO on a Monday about what their biggest challenges are versus on a Friday, it could be whatever happened that morning.
Mhm.
Same probably as a services leader, right? So it's quite hard because it's not natural instinct to like let's focus on less things, for example. And this actually links back to the service offerings. So in your world, if I understand it, right, that because those services offerings are going to enable clients to reach some outcomes, depending on whether they're a net new customer, an existing customer that's looking to unlock additional value. So in your model, have you put a lot of time and effort into the service offerings and how those are structured to enable customers at different levels of kind of marketing maturity to unlock value from your solutions? Tell us a little bit about, as you say, your
Absolutely.
journey there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that came partly with that shift into SaaS and again, then subscription services, right? How can we
Right.
make clients not only well, be retained on the product side, but also on the actual services delivery, right? And I think partly it was this simplification of what do we sell, how do we provide services, and value again being overstretched, as in hopefully the CMO has the same values when you talk to them, but it's also how much time are you spending on figuring out how you monetize that value, right? I
Hmm.
think that'll be your 110% if you understand that monetary value, the editor is spending 5 minutes less per news article. But really, I've seen not many clients going there. Maybe some do, but it also sometimes 80% is enough again, right?
Hmm.
In the service delivery, I think it is going away from sizing every single service delivery every single time, very bespoke to every single client, because you're saying my products SaaS, it is more in a framework. You can still do a lot, right? You can still integrate a lot of things, but it's getting less complex, but it's still getting or retaining the powerful kind of tool set that you have. We
Yep.
want to do the same with services, right? As in describe services that you can sell to a mid-market, to an enterprise client, regardless of where they are in their journey, right? Which again, you can make that larger if I don't understand my client's journey or where they are on their journey, right? Are they new to DXP? Are they just bringing their assets online into a system that can manage assets, right? We can understand that and we can track that and we can say you're here on your journey and basically our services come in. It's the same package, but we do something different here, right?
Hmm.
Because for us, it's this that we deliver or are able to deliver in that capability. But really, we focus on this and then we go somewhere next. And this is this being the trusted advisor and kind of taking the client by the hand,
Hmm.
understanding that overall value,
Hmm.
right? Which that's what I like about services currently, right? There's so much movement because it's people getting a better grasp on what is my value as a client, also added to what we see. How do we complement that, right? How can we add to that?
Yeah, I think the creativity and the business acumen and the design element of services is massively underappreciated by people in technology as a career path, for sure. Because you're running a function, or you're participating in a function that's one of the largest teams in many technology businesses. You have a P&L. um, there's a lot of complexity and it affords a lot of
Mhm.
opportunity for kind of like creativity. Curious to know then, so if we're a net new customer, so the partner, a partner, be it an agency or a you know third party services implementation partner or a GSI, oftentimes they will be doing the implementation of Sitecore for our client. Yes, correct.
Correct.
And then do you provide an expert service over the top that you charge clients for, or is it a package to the partner, or is there a membership drawdown model? How do you support implementations, or are there a variety of ways that you can support
Sure.
implementations?
So let's assume the client goes with a partner, or we do have some clients that are mature enough with big IT departments, big marketing departments, kind of implement themselves or configure themselves.
Yep. Okay.
Um, we really come in as that sometimes conduit or glue, sometimes just really again in this triangle of we're adding the product expertise on top, right? We
Yep.
know the roadmap. My teams are the product specialists. They know if a new feature came out, right? And
Mhm.
so we do have enablement. It usually takes time to spread the word about some things, right? So we come in as that. I said trusted advisor a lot. It's really a risk mitigation for the client to know that I bought something that provides value, but is complex to a certain extent because we do want to have those powerful capabilities. And I do want the vendor on the table, right? I do want someone
Yep.
to explain to me or complain to, right, in addition to my partner that's doing the implementation. We work equally with clients and partners. So usually the client is paying for the services then.
Right. Okay. Okay. Interesting. Cool. Yeah, I think that's the best model. Like when that's how we're doing it when
It works.
we're
Yeah.
providing. You've got to get you've got to get the structure of the packages and the cost of them right so that you're not seen as cannibalizing maybe the services revenue opportunity for the partner. Of course, yes, there's all of these of course moments, but fundamentally, I think customers like to have a vendor that's got skin in the game that's going to be in there with them alongside the third party. And I also think, well, I guess another question then is for many, I've seen kind of more like an us and them mindset in terms of like
Mhm.
internal services versus partner. But have you spent time building relationships with the partners and educating them on the value of your services with the customer so that they're not, they don't view it as a threat, they view it as a value add? What tell us a little bit about is
We
that
we
something that
we
you've done?
did. Yeah,
Yeah.
we
Earlier
did.
in the
We
journey
do.
because it's more mature, right? Yeah.
Doesn't really matter, right? I think it's easier for us if we explain how we work and what we do, because then it's very transparent, which is something we do, right? There's nothing to hide, but it's certainly this ongoing discussion on how big's the cake, right? Who's delivering what, and we're saying, look, we're kind of staying out of it because we're really this cherry on top that you can't replace really as the vendor services team, right?
Right.
Um, but it's communication again, and clearly when you define the service packages, as we've been discussing earlier, is you want to cut your packages so that there is no visible overlap, right? Um, and it's very clear and distinct in how far we can go or don't, right? And then in the best case scenarios, I guess it is us talking to the partners up front or preferably early in that journey to say, kind of cut the cake, right? And say, this is what you guys do, this is where we come in, or if you have this function, well, we'll scale down the services bit on that and we'll focus on something else.
Yeah. Okay. So, because if you're just relying on partners to just help you, reduce cost, right? And there's a lot of that challenge going on right
Yeah.
now for many in the market. If it's just we feel like we can cut out a load of cost by doing X percentage via partners, that's a bit of a landmine that you can step on if you're not careful. So, um, talk to us a little bit about like the role, like how do you see the role of partners either in cost model or the profit center, or just more broadly? Because if you
Mhm.
look at it kind of with this narrow vision of just cost, it's problematic, is it not?
Well, it's too easy, right? It doesn't work. I think it's proven to not work. And maybe that's the back and forth between we're running as a cost center, clients or sorry, partners running as a profit center with a
Yep.
different outlook, right? So if you just focus on cost, you might just get what you pay for, but does that help you being the CMO or that marketing team? Because you're
Yep.
not realizing the value at the end of that day, right?
Mhm.
And that is certainly what we see under scoped situations where, well, somebody's just purely looking at cost. And then again, this could probably be its own podcast episode, right?
Mhm.
Where you're missing out on the skills you get for that money, right? Or partners got to achieve a certain margin. They can't do that with their A team. They go to their B or C team,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Um, it's again, you got to understand where you want to go, and sometimes that does cost money because you got a nice product. You buy a nice car, you want to have a nice set of tires on it, right?
Mhm. Yeah. It's interesting that kind of service offering design is always very internally focused. And I think I've seen some organizations now actually realizing that we might need to get involved in some of this with our partners or partners that we want to
Mhm.
grow relationships with. Because if you don't understand the unit economics, right, of how a services business is working, so for example, even if you've got a boutique agency partner that's got 10 people, well, that might be, $1 million or €1 million in purely in like salary cost, right? Before they even, before they even start, right? So for them to kind of make money on your proposition, right? They've got to be doing $2, $3 million, right? Which if you've got an average deal value of 50K or 100K, you can pretty quickly work out that you can need a significant number of units to make it work. So I think sometimes people forget that. Like if they've just got, oh yeah, we've got a load of partners that we give an odd project to now and then, you're never going to get the best from them because they're doing one project every however long, right? Um,
And that doesn't, sorry to add to
Go for
that,
it. Yeah.
right? It doesn't talk about enablement time, enablement
Yeah.
cost for the partner. So I think that's
Yeah.
very important to look at, right?
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
no, I couldn't agree more. I just think it's a very like you said, you've been there 10 years. I'm guessing that you would, if you were talking to someone, you'd be like anyone looking at this or looking at iterating, starting or iterating their partner motion, you would be guiding them that this is a multi-year investment, right? This is not it works in
And this
6
is
months.
continuous, really.
Yeah.
This really is continuous, right? And it's again, it's different, two sides of the same coin, right? We don't scale to a model where partners can scale, right? So I don't even think we are cannibalizing anything, right? And rightfully, partners can go to the same level of product expertise with an asterisk as we can, but yeah, it's think about what you want to achieve. Think about enablement for your partners if you're just starting up, right? And like you said, think about who you invite maybe into that first circle of what was starting here and we're getting feedback and really take feedback and sit with the partners.
Hmm.
Right. I think that that's being said a lot, but it's not necessarily done. And we've learned that over the years. And now it feels when we're launching services packages, it's certainly being communicated to the partners, preferably ahead of time.
Yeah. The point that I was trying to get at earlier was there is a lot of enablement that goes into partners. So you typically can have partner enablement roles, you can have partner
Hmm.
operations roles, or if you're smaller and you don't have dedicated full-time staff for that, it's on the desk of the services manager or leaders. The point that I was trying to get across was something for people to be thinking about is like how you insert yourself in some of the service offering design for partners. Now, partners can be again quite one dimensional. We want to sell T&M
Hmm.
based services, right? That's how we want to sell your
Which is
services,
fine. Yeah, which is
which
absolutely
is
fine.
which
Yeah.
is fine. But again, to your point, okay, there is a way that you can maximize profitability on T&M based services, right? And that is your recovery rates. That's not
Yeah.
having to do rework for free and all of these types of things. So there is definitely value in enabling your partners to deliver services as best that they can, particularly if they buy into that vision of, well, we want good throughput. So yes, we want to make good
Yeah.
margin. Yes, ideally, we want to have these big, chunky 6, 12 month projects or 3, 6, 12 month projects, depending on like the size and complexity of your solution could be more. But we want to do more of them, right? We want to get through them. We don't want to have a team that's trapped on a project where we can't recycle them and things like
Yeah.
that. So I think as you said, figuring out the way to work with the partner to help them iterate their offerings and the way that they deliver services. You don't need to prescribe to them, this is how you need to do it, but you can share with them best practices and all of these types of things so they don't make mistakes.
Absolutely, and we've done a lot of work. Shout out to the teams in comms and kind of documentation. We've done a lot over the past few years to better document the solutions, to better document how we deliver certain things, be that CSM support services. If you're a partner, I think talk to your vendors, right? The vendor might very clearly articulate this is what we provide in services, or again the different functions, and here's where we stop, right? Here's where I want you, partner, to come in and deliver what we don't, because we don't scale into, I don't know, UX design or just making up some example, right?
Yeah.
So that is the
Yeah.
sweet spot for the partners where I would say go in there, or something like the marketing consulting, the business consulting, which again, some vendors do, some others don't, because you just have the experts somewhere else.
Cool. Right.
Exciting.
Final part that I want to go through, coming back to this point about where services is now sitting. So
Mhm.
you've had some experience working under CCO, working under CRO. Again, through the lens of like, cost center, profit center, or all of the above, right? I think org design is super important and kind of that, maybe the traditional approach versus a more modern GTM. So, kind of to you, firstly, does it matter where it sits, and how does it matter
Of
where it
course, and
sits?
and then of course, and then it depends, right? I think for us, we're sitting under we've sat under virtually everyone, I think,
Okay.
in that list over the past 10 years, or even before I joined. We're currently under the COO, which I think for us works
COO
beautifully.
or
COO,
COO? Okay, cool.
which works perfectly because we got the alignment, we're close to support, we're close to learning, close to CSM. Um, it helps huddle and kind of walk towards the same direction, addressing the same pain points. Or I like to be positive, right? Working on the same wins and kind of be in lockstep.
Is
Um,
customer success under the COO as well?
yes,
Okay. Yep.
yes, and it's not always it didn't always it hasn't always been Jesus Monday. Um, it hasn't always been, but it also for us this is good. I think for others, and we had a discussion previously on where are you in your GTM, in your journey, in your maturity. It really comes down to where are you as a company as well, right? You focus on growth, you focus on revenue generation.
Mhm.
Maybe it's good to have services or other functions, right? I'll include CSM and maybe support and learning under services for now. Because you do want to scale up, you do want to go into the market and maybe overreach slightly when you touch clients, right?
Mhm.
With your deliveries. It it has that outward effect and it does have that inwards effect of how you can run your org, right?
Mhm.
I'm talking budgets, I'm talking the KPIs you're looking at. Can you hire people when you think you're very utilized, right? Billable is high. Can we hire? Do we follow the numbers before we hire, or do we just hire 20 people because we know revenue's coming in and the forecast is looking pretty nice?
Yeah.
So um I was trying to find kind of like a roadmap of where should services sit or where should these functions sit in your journey,
Yep.
but I think that shift to SaaS kind of made it non-linear, if that makes sense.
Yep.
Um, and I'd like to hear back from the audience or the other SDA members on where are you and what do you see? But really for us, it's good that we're close with the other functions in that shift towards outcomes and client value and understanding what those outcomes are and to your point, how we measure those, right?
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
Otherwise, I think CFO obviously it's more financially driven. It's more maybe coming in outwards in be cost efficient. What's your margin? Rather higher margin than low margin, right? Which again, depending on how you cut your services, you may not be able to get a high margin, right? Because you got the product experts in geo, they are expensive because they deliver excellent services, right? So you might have a lower margin, whereas
Yeah.
if you're a small upcoming SaaS company, you might do implementations that you outsource somewhere, right? Be that with
Yeah.
partners or offshore. Um, CCO, I think, is close to COO, maybe, right? And then it depends on where the different departments sit, and you can sometimes see that shuffling based on team size and org size.
Hmm.
Um, what did I miss?
CRO.
CRO,
Yeah.
which and that's not good or bad, really, or that's not bad, right? It's more um, revenue driven, right? So it's a supplement nearly to support, whereas you support selling the license, selling the subscriptions,
Hmm.
right? Um, it's not that there's no focus on client outcomes. There certainly isn't, right? Otherwise, we wouldn't
Yeah.
be in business, or other companies wouldn't be in business. But it's certainly less focused on going above and beyond, maybe, right? Because you're supporting the sales org very clearly, right?
Mm.
Whereas under COO, CCO, I think you're still supporting the sales function, but you're also focused on the post sales more.
Mm. I
Argument to discuss, I think.
Well, it's interesting because some of it is very well thought through for some companies, and some of it is just a byproduct of who's leaving or joining that company at a point in time. Like it's
That's
as simple
life.
as that, right?
Yep.
Like you've had a massive change in leadership, and suddenly you end up under a different person, a different role. Like That's I've seen that happen numerous times. Oh yeah, we were under the CCO, but they left and now we're under the CRO. Why?
Yeah,
Because there was no one else to give them to. CFO didn't want
yeah,
it. Um, you see people being moved under the CRO, and it's actually they're a VP sales in disguise, which is one to watch out for.
yeah.
The way you know that, like, is a proper CRO understands the revenue and the customer life cycle, right? And looks at revenue across all different types of revenue, new sales, expansions, retentions, all of the above, right? Whereas more one-dimensional CRO, who's really a VP sales in disguise, is just about net new sales and how are you going to help me get that done? And they tend to get bored of services because services is complex and it's difficult and there's a
Oh, we
lot
got
of
opinions. Yeah, certainly.
yeah. And so then
Absolutely.
they shift it somewhere else. So I think
Mm.
there's a dynamic. I would always advise people to be like, is it a true C-suite leader that you're under for the first time? Are they new to their role, right? Are they the first time C-level, in which case they may be leaning on you. If you're a really experienced services leader, you've been there for a lot of times. You got a lot to offer in that relationship. And I think going back to the strategy piece, there's a lot of value in making time to work with your colleagues and sitting down with them and being like, how's your strategy evolving? What are you on the hook for now that you weren't? And having insight into that. Like with a CFO, for example, you can be their best friend or their worst enemy because and you need to really understand how they recognize revenue for both software and for services because you can be helping us hit our number if we can pull forward 3 or 4 deals and the go lives in a quarter, you can be the absolute hero or you can be the villain, right? So I've seen a lot of services leaders have great relationships with their CFOs because it's like,
Hmm.
we're controlling, there's an element of control of the financial performance. I think to your point, COO is great if you are in a customer org where you and the rest of the post-sale organization are all working and collaborating. I've seen structures where service is in one place, CS is in another place, sales is in another place, and kind of there's some silos there and some gaps.
Yeah,
So I think from my perspective, it's kind of understanding are you where you are by design or by accident? And if where you've landed is who you're working with, kind of an experienced person in their role, and how's that going to influence the dynamic with you? And also, then going back to the strategy, like what are we shooting for this year? If we're shooting for, we went from a loss last year, do we need to make a profit? Or, it's 30% growth, not 70% growth, right? And therefore we need to impact customer acquisition, customer retention. There's all of these dynamics to it. And I think it's that level of awareness about how will, the challenges manifest for you as a services leader, depending on where you sit and who you partner with.
absolutely. And I'd even add, and this is the fun in strategizing and kind of drawing that up, right? I'd also add, it depends on where you are in your journey, right? Are you still selling on-premise? Are you selling SaaS solutions? Are you selling subscriptions, which even for the CRO, CFO, COO is a learning, right? Because
Mm.
there's for the CRO, for example, I don't want to speak for them, but it's certainly different selling an on-premise where you come in, you sell the disk, you leave towards I actually got to retain this client, right? So it's not
Yeah.
one sale, it's a lot of small sales over time, multi years. So that is a shift. And I think then definitely, right? Services, CSM, those functions can complement that, make it easier to ease into this new way of working.
Yeah. Yeah. I was surprised actually. I was speaking to some of our clients, like a lot of businesses that I knew that were on-prem, they had the really long implementations. It was 12, 15 months.
Hmm.
But then I've also seen it the other way, actually, where the SaaS solution is taking longer because their on-prem
All
solution was
right.
very much you just basically switch it on, right? And it was just a lot more prescriptive and like this is what you get. And
Hmm.
then maybe there was more in the support and the maintenance contract. Um, so so yeah, I've seen it the other way where I was like, huh, the SaaS is taking longer. I wouldn't have expected that. They're like,
That's
yeah,
odd,
because
but
there's
no.
there's options now. We're giving them options,
Yeah.
and it's and we're not used to it. So I think then final point, commercial awareness, right, within services leadership. So, you know, everyone's in sales these days. What for you has been what's kind of helped you to embrace that or get better at it over time? Because it's not always the natural place for services leaders to exist. What's sort of been some of your experience in building up this commercial awareness and commercial capability that you would advise others to think about?
Yeah, well, it's service leaders and the consultants, right? All the solution architects, all the
Yeah,
tech consultants.
yeah,
To me, I think you said right, everyone's a seller. I think what helped us is we shifted to subscription or ARR services before we went full SaaS, right? So
okay,
I built up a TAM practice which was scaled or basically drafted to be multi-year, right? Because we wanted to work with the clients at
yep,
that point with on-premise. So we had to kind of get into that mindset of I'm not just delivering something, I'm signing off, I'm done. You're not done, right? There's something next. Everyone's selling. Like, look for how can we help the client with where you said what's your target to understand what is the target or help them understand that target and then work towards that, right? Come up with measures, have an evolution of that practice as in, hey, we can actually help in this regard with this product or this feature because it unlocks a different way of delivering certain things, capabilities, right? So for us, the shift to ARR services, then adding SaaS made it very easy to go from ARR to full subscription, or depending on how you qualify that, right? Have
yep,
that multi-year mindset that I'm not just coming in 20 hours, signing off, go somewhere else, but really walk with that client
yep.
beyond the implementation where you walk for 12 months, right? And you have different discussions with the clients, you have different discussions with sales internally, with your CFO, right? Because it's a different mindset.
Hmm.
And that really is the outcome focus, which I think is the next step in our journey to really go from we've figured out how to retain clients, how to have them keep subscribed on our services. Let's focus even more on why are we doing all this?
I like how you, as a final thought, I love how you did talk about the importance of the village and the frontline teams and the management team. Like, I think thinking that one can just improve commercial performance of services or the business through, you being the hero and not coaching the team on fiscal discipline, commercial awareness, change requests, right? Like controlling budgets, looking for new opportunities, these types of things. It makes it a hell of a lot easier to grow the commercial performance of the business and services if the whole team has got that commercial acumen.
Yep.
And it's not about, not if you're too scared of talking about we're all in sales, right? It's we need to have commercial acumen or commercial awareness, right, about the value that we can drive and about looking for new opportunities for the company, right? I think that makes it a lot easier for a services leader if they've got the whole team thinking in at least the right way in the right direction. Really appreciate the time, Jens. Thank you very much indeed. Hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Brilliant. Yeah, a few kind of comments on some of the things. I think um, not being kind of one dimensional, I think is something that I would sort of take away really, which is, you talked at the beginning about we're partner first, but there's like a caveat to that, right? Which is you still in that world have a very defined value proposition to what services is to the customer and to the partner, and that's something that you've built up over time. So a lot of folks who are looking at kind of transitioning to this partner first motion, you can't forget about the internal role strategy and go to market of services. I think that was very important.
It doesn't mean partner only, right? It's partner
Correct,
first, but we're
yes,
still
there you
there
go.
as the vendor, right?
There you go.
Yeah.
Exactly. I think the gray. So the gray is regardless of whether you're in a cost center or a profit center, is you need to be aware that there's some common ground between the two, which is customer value, right? Outcomes, retention, all of these things. Because if those fall by the wayside in sacrificed to the financial goals of the services function, then you're going to fall short. And again, I think thinking about where you sit within an organization means that you shouldn't necessarily forget about the other stakeholders that you're going to be working with. I think overall it just speaks to the diversity and the complexity and the challenge of services. So thank you very much for the insight.
Thank you.
For any listeners, you can head over to our website, precursive.com slash podcast, I believe it is. If you're curious to know about the SDA that Jens mentioned, that's the Services Delivery Alliance, which is a pretty cool network, right, Jens, of services
It
leaders,
is.
to be fair. So servicesdeliveryalliance.com, you can sign up there and join a free network to learn from your peers. And for everyone else, have a great Monday.